My son passed away, leaving behind a fortune and a home worth $17 million. My daughter-in-law inherited it all, while I was left with nothing but an old cabin in the countryside. Then she told me, "Go live there, it suits you." But days later, what I found inside that cabin changed everything. Before we begin, I'm so glad you're here. Follow my story till the end and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. I never thought saying goodbye to my son would be easier than what came 3 days later. Sitting in that lawyer's office, surrounded by silence and cold formality. The funeral had been a blur of dark suits and soft voices, but this was when the reality truly set in. "Mrs. Patterson," the lawyer began, adjusting his glasses as he opened a thick folder. "I know this is difficult, but we need to review your son's final wishes." I sat rigid in my chair, my hands trembling in my lap. Beside me, Zuri, my daughter-in-law, shifted restlessly, her manicured nails tapping against her designer bag. Michael had been gone just a week, only 38 years old. The doctors said it was something sudden, something no one could have predicted. The lawyer cleared his throat and started reading. "To my beloved wife, Zuri, I leave the family home at 1247 Oakwood Drive, along with all furnishings, vehicles, and the sum of $17 million from my investment accounts and insurance policies." 17 million. The number echoed in my head like thunder. Zuri gasped softly, but when I turned to look at her, I didn't see shock. I saw satisfaction. Calm, quiet satisfaction, as if she'd been expecting every word. The lawyer kept reading, but his voice faded into the background. "The house, our home of 30 years, where I raised my son, where my husband took his last breath, all of it gone." Then I heard my own name. "And to my mother, Eileen Patterson," the lawyer continued, "I leave the property at 847 County Road 15, known as Willow Creek Cabin, along with the land and all structures upon it." That was it. In less than 10 minutes, my world had been divided up and handed out. Zuri got the mansion and millions. I got an old cabin in the woods, a place I'd visited maybe 5 times in my life. I swallowed hard. "Is that all?" I managed to ask. The lawyer gave me a kind look. "Your son was very clear about his wishes, Mrs. Patterson. The property includes 43 acres. 43 acres of overgrown forest, a forgotten cabin that hadn't been cared for in years." Zuri finally spoke, her tone dripping with politeness. "Oh, Eileen, I'm sure Michael wanted you to have a peaceful place to retire. You always loved your quiet time, didn't you?" The way she said quiet time made it sound like an insult. I looked at her, really looked, and for the first time, I saw it. There wasn't a hint of grief in her eyes, only calculation. "I suppose I should start packing," I said softly. Zuri's mask slipped just a little. "Actually, Eileen, it might be best if you move to the cabin right away. I need some time to process things here. In our home." Our home. Just like that, my 30 years there were erased. The drive back was silent. When we arrived, she disappeared into the master bedroom, leaving me alone in the living room where Michael had taken his first steps, where we'd celebrated every Christmas, every birthday, every memory that mattered. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked through the house like a shadow, touching the walls, the photographs, the memories that would no longer belong to me. In Michael's office, I stopped at his desk. There was a photo, him at 5 years old, missing a front tooth, holding up a fish he'd caught at Willow Creek Cabin. I smiled through my tears. I'd forgotten that day. The next morning, Zuri appeared in full makeup, perfect as ever, as if nothing had changed. She found me at the kitchen table, my untouched coffee cold in front of me. "Eileen," she said, her voice sharp and practiced. "I've arranged for movers to help you pack," Zuri said one morning, her voice light but cold. "They'll be here this afternoon." "This afternoon?" I looked up in disbelief. "I know this is hard," she interrupted quickly, but there wasn't a trace of sympathy in her tone. "Honestly, staying here is just making it harder for both of us. The cabin will be good for you. Fresh air, peace, time to reflect." She made it sound like a vacation, not exile. That morning, I packed 40 years of my life into cardboard boxes. The movers she'd hired worked quickly and quietly, handling my memories as if they were just objects. I kept waiting for Zuri to appear, maybe to offer a kind word or even a polite goodbye. But she stayed locked away in the master bedroom until it was time for me to leave. When the truck finally pulled out of the driveway, I stood there watching it disappear. That's when Zuri appeared at the front door, walking toward me slowly, deliberately. "I want you to know, Eileen," she said, stopping close enough for her words to sting. "Michael and I talked about this. He felt it was time for you to have your own space. He worried you were becoming too dependent." The lie was delivered so smoothly that for one brief, foolish second, I almost believed her. But I knew my son. I knew how he spoke, how he cared. These weren't his words. This was Zuri rewriting the story to suit herself. Then her mask slipped completely. "That cabin is exactly where you belong." The cruelty in her voice felt like a blade across years of shared family dinners, holidays, and memories. This was the woman my son had chosen, the one he'd trusted with everything he built. I said nothing. What could I say? The law was on her side. Michael's will was clear. I had no way to fight it, no power to undo what felt like the deepest betrayal of all. As I drove away from Oakwood Drive for the last time, I saw her standing in the doorway, calm, composed, victorious. The road to Willow Creek grew narrower and rougher with every mile. By the time I reached the cabin, the sun was sinking behind the trees, painting the sky in gold and gray. The cabin looked worse than I remembered. Faded wood, a sagging porch, windows filmed with dust and time. So this was my inheritance. This was what my son thought I deserved. Standing there in the growing dark, surrounded by silence and trees that seemed to lean in closer, I felt more alone than I had in all my 64 years. But deep inside, something didn't add up. Michael called me every Sunday. He never forgot my birthday, never let a week pass without checking in. So why would he suddenly decide to send me away? Why give his wife everything and leave me with this? Out of habit, I reached for my phone to call him, and the realization hit me again, hard and cold. He was gone. But this time, my grief was joined by something else. A quiet, uneasy feeling. Suspicion. The next morning, the moving truck arrived, its bright paint looking strange against the forest backdrop. The driver leaned out his window. "You sure this is the right place, ma'am?" I wanted to tell him no, that this was all some mistake, but I just nodded and pointed toward the porch. "Yes, please, just put everything inside." It took 3 hours to unload my things. My dining set looked ridiculous in the tiny main room. My grandmother's china cabinet leaned awkwardly against a wall of old pine that hadn't seen polish in decades. When the movers drove away, the silence returned. I stood among the boxes, feeling small in a place that didn't feel like mine. The cabin had barely functioning power, rusty pipes, and a wood-burning stove I didn't know how to use. The first night, I slept on an air mattress, too tired to assemble my bed. Every sound made me jump. The creaking wood, the scratching in the walls, the whisper of wind through cracks I hadn't noticed before. By morning, I'd made up my mind. I'd clean this place, sell it fast, and use whatever I could get to find a small apartment somewhere closer to civilization. I started unpacking, arranging furniture, trying to make the best of it. That's when I found something strange. A box tucked behind the couch that I didn't remember packing. Inside were old photographs and documents that had belonged to my late husband, Robert. Robert had been gone for 8 years, and yet here was something of his, something I'd never seen before. I thought I'd already gone through all of Robert's papers. So where had this box come from? It must have been tucked away somewhere in Michael's house, a place I'd forgotten even existed. As I sorted through the yellowed pages, I found old insurance forms, tax records. And then, at the very bottom, something that made my hands tremble. A property deed for Willow Creek, but not the same one the lawyer had shown me. This one was older, dated 1962, when Robert's father first bought the land. The details were different too. It listed not just the 43 acres of forest, but also mineral rights, oil, and gas leases, terms I didn't fully understand, but that filled me with an odd mix of curiosity and hope. I tried to brush it off. After all, that land had never produced anything. These old claims probably meant nothing, but the fact that I'd found this document in a box I didn't even remember packing, that unsettled me. I was still thinking about it when I heard the sound of tires crunching over gravel. Through the grimy window, a sleek black car appeared, making its way up the uneven driveway. My heart sank as I recognized the driver. Zuri. She stepped out wearing designer jeans and boots that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. She looked around the property with thinly veiled disgust, stepping carefully over the dirt as if the ground itself offended her. "Eileen," she called in that sugary voice she used when she wanted something. "I thought I'd stop by and see how you're settling in." I opened the door but didn't bother inviting her in. "What do you want, Zuri?" "I brought you some things from the house," she said, holding up a small box. "A few of Michael's things, sentimental items." Without waiting for permission, she walked past me into the cabin. Her eyes swept across the room, sharp and searching. This wasn't a friendly visit, this was an inspection. "It's rustic," she said, setting the box down on the counter. "I'm sure you'll grow to love it here, so peaceful, so natural." "Why are you really here, Zuri?" I asked. Her smile wavered for just a second. "Oh, I just wanted to make sure you have everything you need. You know, nothing important left behind." The way she emphasized important made my stomach twist. Her gaze flicked around the room again. Deliberate, calculating. That's when I realized she was searching for something. "Like what?" I asked. "Oh, you know, documents, papers, things that might have gotten mixed up during the move." She moved a little too close to the couch, to the very spot where I'd found Robert's box. I stepped between her and it. "I can't imagine what papers of mine would concern you." Her smile tightened. "Of course not. I just want to be sure there are no loose ends. You know how complicated legal matters can be after a loss." She lingered another 20 minutes, making meaningless small talk while her eyes continued to roam the cabin. When she finally left, the silence that followed felt like oxygen returning to the room. But her visit had confirmed what I was starting to suspect. Something about Michael's will and my so-called inheritance wasn't right. That evening, I returned to the box of Robert's papers. Most of it was routine, insurance policies, receipts, repair records. But at the very bottom, tied with a rubber band, was something that stopped my breath. A letter. Addressed to me in Michael's handwriting. My hands shook as I unfolded it. "Mom, if you're reading this, something's happened to me and you're probably wondering why I left you the cabin. I know it doesn't seem like much compared to what Zuri received, but I need you to trust me. The cabin is more important than it looks. Check Dad's old toolbox in the shed. There's something there you need to find. And Mom, be careful who you trust. Not everything is what it seems. Love, Michael." I read it 3 times before the words truly sank in. Michael had known. He'd planned for this. But what was in that toolbox? And why hide this letter among Robert's papers instead of keeping it with his will? I glanced out the window. The forest beyond the cabin had turned dark and silent. Somewhere out there was the shed, a place I hadn't even looked at yet, and inside it apparently were answers I wasn't supposed to find. Then it hit me like a jolt of electricity. Zuri hadn't come to check on me. She'd come to find this. The letter, or whatever Michael had hidden. I folded the letter carefully and slipped it into my pocket. For the first time since the funeral, I felt something new. Hope. But beneath that hope was a chill that crept deep into my bones. If Michael had been worried enough to hide this letter, then what exactly had he uncovered? And just how far would Zuri go to keep me from finding it? Outside, the wind rose, shaking the cabin windows. But this time, I wasn't afraid. I was determined. Tomorrow, I would find that toolbox. That night, sleep wouldn't come. Every creak of the cabin made me wonder if I was truly alone, or if someone else was already out there, waiting. By dawn, I was already dressed, flashlight in one hand, determination in the other. Today, I would find Robert's old toolbox. The shed stood about 50 yards behind the cabin, half hidden beneath wild bushes and leaning so far to one side it looked ready to give up and collapse. The door was swollen from years of rain, and it took all my weight to force it open. Inside, the air was heavy with dust and the smell of rust. Spiderwebs stretched across the corners like forgotten lace, rusted tools hung from nails, and old paint cans sat on the shelves with labels so faded they were impossible to read. It looked like no one had stepped inside for decades. But there, in the far corner, was Robert's red metal toolbox, the same one he'd carried to every home repair for over 30 years. My throat tightened with the weight of old memories, the sound of his quiet patience, his steady hands fixing a hinge or a leaky faucet, the scent of his cologne lingering in the air long after he'd gone. The box was heavier than I remembered. I had to lift it with both hands onto the workbench. The latches were stiff but still held. When I opened them, the familiar scent of metal and old oil rose, and beneath it faintly, Robert's cologne. Somehow, after all these years, it was still there. The top tray held the usual things: screwdrivers, wrenches, measuring tape. But when I lifted the tray, something unexpected waited underneath. A thick manila envelope and a small brass key tied to a string. My hands shook as I opened the envelope. The first page was a geological survey of the Willow Creek property, dated just 6 months before Michael's passing. I didn't understand all the technical terms, but a few words jumped out at me. Significant petroleum deposits, estimated reserves, commercial potential confirmed. My pulse quickened. The next paper made me gasp. It was a formal offer from Blackstone Energy Corporation, offering to purchase the mineral rights for $50 million. $50 million. I read the number 3 times before it felt real. The letter was addressed to Michael, dated 2 months before his death, stamped urgent, response required. But that wasn't the biggest shock. At the bottom of the envelope was another document, a different version of Michael's will. Not the one the lawyer had read aloud. This one was dated a week before he died, and everything was reversed. In this version, the cabin and all mineral rights beneath it were left entirely to me, along with detailed notes about the oil deposits and the pending sale to Blackstone Energy. Zuri, on the other hand, was left only the house and a modest trust of $200,000. Attached to the will was a note in Michael's familiar handwriting. "Mom, if you're reading this, it means something's gone wrong. I discovered that Zuri has been trying to harm me slowly. I have proof, but I don't know how much time I have left. If anything happens to me, this is your protection. The key opens my safety deposit box at First National Bank, Box 247. Everything you need is there. I love you. Michael." The world seemed to tilt beneath me. I gripped the edge of the workbench to steady myself as the truth hit like a storm. Zuri had deceived everyone. She'd stolen Michael's voice, his trust, his legacy, and somehow replaced his real will with a false one. And now, I finally understood why she was so desperate for me to sell this land. The brass key glinted in my palm. Box 247. Whatever Michael had uncovered about her must be there. I was still staring at it when I heard the crunch of tires outside. My heart jumped. Through the grimy shed window, I saw Zuri's black car pulling up beside the cabin. And she wasn't alone. 2 men in suits stepped out behind her. Panic surged through me. I stuffed the documents back into the envelope and shoved it beneath the toolbox, covering it with an old rag just as the shed door creaked shut behind me. By the time I reached the porch, Zuri was already waiting, her voice smooth and cheerful. "Eileen!" she called, flashing that practiced smile. "Perfect timing. I brought some people who'd like to meet you." 2 men stood beside her, both polished and too confident. "What's this about?" I asked cautiously, keeping the brass key hidden in my fist behind my back. "These gentlemen represent a development company," Zuri explained sweetly, motioning toward the taller man. He stepped forward with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Mrs. Patterson, I'm David Hutchkins from Riverside Development. We're looking to purchase your property. It's perfect for our next residential project. His partner added, We're prepared to make you a generous offer, $75,000 cash. We can close within the week. $75,000 for land that another company had valued at $50 million. I looked at Zuri. Her smile didn't waver, but I saw it, a flicker of panic in her eyes. She needed me to sell. She needed this done before I discovered what Michael had hidden. That's very generous, I said carefully, but I'm not interested in selling right now. I've only just arrived. Hutchkins exchanged a glance with his partner. Mrs. Patterson, perhaps you don't understand the condition of this place. It needs major work. Electrical, plumbing, structural. You could be looking at tens of thousands in repairs. Zuri chimed in softly, her voice full of false concern. Eileen, be reasonable. You shouldn't be living out here alone at your age. What if something happened and no one found you for days? Her tone was gentle, but the message wasn't. It was a warning. I forced a calm smile. I appreciate your concern, I said evenly, but inside my pulse was pounding. But I'm not ready to make any decisions about the property yet, I said evenly. Hutchkins's smile didn't falter, but his eyes did. They turned sharp, cold. Of course, he replied smoothly. Take a day or two to think it over. We'll be staying at the Pine View Motel in town if you change your mind. The moment they left, silence fell over the cabin once again. I sat staring at the small brass key in my palm, my mind racing faster than I could keep up with. Zuri wasn't just a greedy woman chasing comfort. She was far worse, deliberate, strategic, and ruthless. The false will, the push to isolate me, even this sudden offer to buy the property, every part of it was part of her plan. But Michael, my brilliant son, had been one step ahead of her. Even as his health declined, he'd found a way to protect me, to gather evidence, to ensure the truth wouldn't die with him. The real question now was, how much time did I have before Zuri realized I'd found it? Outside, dusk crept across the trees like smoke. I knew what I had to do. Tomorrow morning, I would drive to First National Bank and open Box 247. Whatever Michael had hidden there would give me the proof and the power to fight back. That night, I barely slept. Every gust of wind against the cabin felt like footsteps on the porch. Every creak of the floorboards whispered the same thing. She knows. But by sunrise, the fear had hardened into resolve. I was no longer the grieving mother Zuri could manipulate. I was a woman with nothing left to lose and everything to protect. And she had no idea what was coming. The drive to First National Bank took me along familiar roads, past Michael's old school, the park where he'd learned to ride his bike, the little diner where we used to share Sunday breakfasts. Every sight that once brought comfort now burned with the weight of betrayal. The bank stood on Main Street, solid and red-bricked, just as it had been for generations. I'd kept an account there for over 30 years, but I'd never had reason to visit the vaults. Until now. Inside, I approached the receptionist, my fingers trembling slightly as I held up the key. I need to access Safety Deposit Box 247, I said. The bank manager, Mrs. Chen, examined the key, the paperwork, and the certified copy of Michael's will that verified my right to the box. She was calm and methodical, the kind of person who'd seen plenty of family secrets unfold behind closed doors. After nearly 20 minutes of calls and signatures, she led me down a narrow staircase to the vault. "Take all the time you need, Mrs. Patterson," she said kindly, sliding a long metal box from its slot. "Ring the bell when you're finished." The door closed behind me with a soft click. I was alone. With a deep breath, I lifted the lid. Inside was a collection of carefully organized folders, Michael's final safeguard, a paper trail that told the truth. The first folder was labeled Medical Records. Inside were copies of reports from his regular physician and separate test results from a private lab. The pages detailed consistent traces of thallium, a toxic metal that, in small repeated doses, could quietly damage the heart while remaining nearly invisible in standard tests. That was how Zuri had done it, quietly, slowly, while pretending to care for him. The second folder revealed bank transfers, dozens of them, showing money siphoned from Michael's accounts into overseas holdings under Zuri's name. Nearly $3 million in total, hidden in small amounts just below the threshold that would alert authorities. My stomach turned. Then came the final folder, the one that changed everything. A flash drive labeled home security footage. Alongside it were printed stills from video files Michael had secretly recorded. He must have known what was happening. The images showed Zuri adding powder to his coffee, mixing something into his food, and tampering with his medication. There were also audio recordings, phone calls between Zuri and a man whose voice I didn't recognize. "The cabin situation is temporary," Zuri's voice said. "Once she signs over the mineral rights, she won't be a problem anymore." "And if she doesn't sign?" the man asked. "Then we'll convince her. One way or another." The meaning was clear, and it froze the blood in my veins. They weren't just planning to take the land, they were planning to take me out of the equation entirely. At the bottom of the box was a final envelope, addressed to the FBI. It was already stamped and sealed, ready to be mailed. Michael had prepared everything. All I had to do was send it, and the truth would be unleashed. But as I sat there in that silent vault, surrounded by evidence of my son's suffering, a different thought took root. Justice was no longer enough. I wanted Zuri to know, to feel the same fear she had forced on Michael, to realize that she'd been outsmarted by the very people she thought she'd destroyed. I photographed every document with my phone, then carefully placed the originals back in the box. The FBI letter would stay there for now, my final safeguard in case something happened to me. The drive back to the cabin was quiet. The road twisted through the forest like a secret I wasn't ready to share. Zuri thought I was powerless. She thought she'd won. But she was about to learn that the woman she left alone in the woods was no longer her victim. She was her reckoning. Just as I turned down the final stretch toward Willow Creek, my phone buzzed on the seat beside me. Zuri's name flashed on the screen. I let it ring. When I played back the message, Zuri's voice was tight, just barely keeping her composure. "Eileen, it's me. Those developers called. They're increasing their offer to 100,000, but only if you decide by tomorrow. I really think you should consider it. That property is just too much for you to handle alone." 100,000. Still a fraction of the true value, but the urgency told me everything I needed to know. Something had rattled them. Maybe they'd realized I'd been to the bank. Maybe they'd simply grown impatient. Either way, it was time to turn the game around. I called Zuri back, softening my voice, adding just the right touch of weary surrender. "I got your message," I said. "You're right. This place is too much for me. I think I'm ready to sell." The relief in her voice was instant. "Oh, Eileen, I'm so glad you're being reasonable about this. Should I call the developers?" "Actually," I said smoothly, "why don't you bring them by tomorrow morning? I'd like to go over the terms in person before I sign anything." "Of course. What time works for you?" 10 o'clock, I replied. "That'll give me time for my coffee and my thoughts." "Perfect," she said sweetly. "And Eileen, Michael would want you to be comfortable and secure." Hearing her use my son's name so casually made my stomach twist, but I kept my tone even. "Yes," I said softly. "I think he would." After I hung up, I began to prepare. I cleaned the cabin, arranged the furniture to give me clear sightlines to every window, and positioned my phone so it would capture everything that happened. Then I sat at the small kitchen table and wrote a letter, not to the FBI this time, but to Sheriff Morrison, a man I'd known since he and Michael were children. I detailed everything, the fake will, the secret bank records, the recordings, and sealed it in an envelope addressed directly to him. If tomorrow went wrong, if Zuri tried to silence me, at least the truth would find its way out. Morning came gray and heavy, matching the tension in my chest. I brewed coffee, buttered toast, and tried to make it look like an ordinary day, but my hands shook as I watched the clock tick toward 10. Right on schedule, I heard engines in the distance. 3 cars rolled up the dirt road, Zuri's sleek black sedan, a white SUV carrying the 2 so-called developers, and a third car I didn't recognize. 4 people stepped out, not 3. The 4th was a woman in her 50s, sharply dressed, carrying a briefcase, and wearing the calm confidence of someone used to making problems disappear. My phone was already recording as I opened the door. I smiled politely. "Good morning, everyone. Please, come in." They filed into the small living room. Zuri's eyes darted around, searching for any clue that I'd discovered her secrets. She was tense, but still believed she had control. "Eileen," she said brightly, "this is Sarah Martinez. She's a notary, here to make everything official." Martinez gave a professional nod. "Mrs. Patterson, I understand you're ready to sell your property. Do you have any questions about the paperwork?" "Just one," I said, settling into my chair like someone holding all the cards. "I'm curious. Why are you all so interested in 43 acres of supposedly worthless forest?" The air shifted instantly. Hutchkins and his partner froze. Zuri's smile tightened until it looked painful. "It's not worthless, Mrs. Patterson," Hutchkins said carefully. "As I mentioned, the land has development potential." "Oh, I see," I replied, leaning forward slightly. "And that development potential wouldn't have anything to do with the $50 million worth of oil beneath it, would it?" The silence that followed was deafening. Zuri went pale. Martinez actually stepped backward toward the door. I raised my phone, its camera light blinking. "Did you know this has been recording our entire conversation?" I asked calmly, "including the part where you tried to pressure me into selling my property for less than 1% of its value?" Zuri's composure shattered. "You don't understand what you're doing, Eileen. You're in over your head." "Am I?" I said quietly. "Because it seems to me I understand perfectly, just like my son did when he uncovered what was really happening." The words hung in the air like thunder. Zuri's face flickered between fear, anger, and something even darker. Calculation. "I don't know what you think you found," she began. "I found everything, Zuri," I said, my voice steady and clear. "The medical evidence, the false documents, the hidden accounts, the recordings, every single piece." Martinez was already inching toward the door, clearly wanting no part of this. The developers followed, mumbling excuses as they hurried outside. That left just the 2 of us. Zuri stepped closer, her smile gone completely. For the first time, I saw her without the performance, the cold, dangerous woman beneath the charm. "You can't prove anything," she whispered, but even she didn't sound convinced. I met her gaze and smiled, calm, certain, unshakable. "Actually, Zuri," I said softly, "I can prove everything. The only question now is, what are you going to do about it?" Outside, I could hear the cars starting, the crunch of tires as the others fled. Inside the cabin, the air felt charged, still and electric. Zuri turned back toward me slowly. The mask was gone, and for the first time, she looked exactly like what she was, a predator cornered. The woman who had smiled sweetly at Michael's funeral was gone. In her place stood someone whose eyes were sharp as ice, all pretense stripped away. "You think you're clever," Zuri said, stepping closer, her tone low and venomous, "but you're just a foolish old woman who doesn't understand the game she's in." I kept my phone steady on the armrest, its camera still recording, my thumb hovering just above the emergency call icon. "I understand perfectly," I said quietly. "You took my son's life for money, and now you want to erase me too." Zuri's expression hardened. "Michael was weak," she hissed. "He believed in family, in loyalty." "He never saw the truth until it was too late." "He saw more than you think," I said, voice trembling but firm. "He gathered proof. He changed his will. He made sure you'd never get away with what you did." Her laugh was sharp, brittle. "Proof?" You mean that sad little folder he thought he'd hidden so cleverly? She reached into her bag and pulled out her phone, scrolling through messages. Did you really think I didn't know about his secret doctors or his little cameras? Please, Eileen, I knew about his entire investigation. My heart lurched. What are you talking about? I knew every move he made, she said with a chilling smile. Every doctor he visited, every test he ran. Even the evidence he thought would expose me, I had it all under control. Doctors can be very understanding when their families are at risk. Her words hit me like a wave of cold water. If that's true, I whispered, then the records in the safety deposit box. Fabricated, she interrupted smoothly. The test results, the samples, the videos, all of it. I made sure Michael's cameras captured exactly what I wanted them to capture. My hands began to shake. You let him think he was protecting me. Oh, I encouraged it, she said almost fondly. Poor Michael, so determined to save his mother. He never realized every step he took was strengthening my position. When the authorities eventually look into his death, they'll find a man who imagined threats that never existed. A man who believed the woman who loved him was out to harm him. She walked toward the window, watching the last of the cars disappear down the road. The official story will be tragic, she continued coolly. A successful man who suffered a mental collapse, seeing danger where there was none. Even his own doctors will confirm it. My voice was barely a whisper. And the will? The real will that left everything to me? Zuri turned, her smile returning, slow and cruel. That was his handwriting, wasn't it? His signature, his notary. He wrote every word himself. I just convinced him it was to protect you. The room spun. Every piece of evidence I'd clung to, every document, every recording, it was all part of her elaborate web. The best part, she said softly, is that Michael left this world believing he'd beaten me. In those final moments, he probably thought he'd protected you. How poetic. I felt the air leave my lungs. Why are you telling me this? Because I want you to understand what losing really feels like, she said simply. Her voice had gone calm, almost serene. Michael underestimated me, and so did you. She walked to the kitchen, opened a cabinet, and picked up one of my mugs. Did you enjoy your coffee this morning? She asked casually. I noticed you brewed a fresh pot before we arrived. Very thoughtful of you. The cup I'd used still sat in the sink. My pulse spiked. A strange dizziness had been building ever since they came. Suddenly, I understood. I gripped the arms of my chair, fighting to stay upright. What? What did you do? Zuri's smile didn't falter. Let's just say you're going to be feeling unwell for a little while. Nothing anyone will question too much. My phone slipped from my shaking hands and hit the floor. Zuri sat across from me as if we were having afternoon tea. The story will be simple, she said, sliding a folded sheet of paper onto the table. A grieving mother, overwhelmed by guilt and loneliness. Even through the haze clouding my mind, I recognized the handwriting, my handwriting. She read aloud, her voice smooth and detached. I can't go on without Michael. The guilt of failing him as a mother is too much to bear. She smiled faintly. Poetic, isn't it? Zuri's voice turned almost gentle as she read the forged note aloud. I'm sorry for the pain I've caused everyone. I can't go on without Michael. She smiled faintly. Touching, don't you think? My vision blurred at the edges, but I forced myself to focus. There had to be something, anything I could still do. My phone was still recording, but even as I thought of it, I knew she was right. Who would believe a video recorded by a woman everyone would assume was unstable with grief? Zuri spoke as if we were discussing the weather. Once this is over, the property will revert to Michael's estate. As his widow, I'll inherit everything. Blackstone Energy has already raised their offer to $60 million. Apparently the deposit is even larger than they thought. $60 million, my son's life, taken for that number. You won't get away with this, I managed to whisper. I already have, she said smoothly. Michael's passing was ruled natural causes. Yours will look like heartbreak, and I'll be the grieving widow who lost everyone she loved." She walked to the door, her voice almost musical. "I'm going to leave now, Eileen. When they find you tomorrow, I'll be at the spa, building an alibi. By the time anyone questions me, all the evidence will point to a lonely woman who simply couldn't go on." The cabin door opened, letting in a rush of cold air that cut through me like ice. "Goodbye, Eileen," she said softly. "I'd say I'm sorry, but we both know that would be a lie." Then she was gone. The sound of her car engine faded into the distance, leaving only the wind and the growing fog in my mind. For a moment I thought this was it, but as the world began to tilt around me, I remembered something Zuri didn't know. The letter. The one I'd written to Sheriff Morrison. It wasn't sitting on my kitchen counter anymore. I'd already mailed it earlier that morning on my trip into town. Inside that envelope were copies of everything I'd found in Michael's deposit box. Even if Zuri had tampered with the original files, that letter would raise questions enough to spark a real investigation. It wasn't much, but it was something. As my pulse quickened and the room spun faster, I held on to that single thought. Zuri thought she'd won. But she had underestimated one thing, a mother's love for her child. Even if I didn't make it, she was never going to escape what she'd done. The world blurred completely then, until the sound of my phone pierced through the haze. It was ringing. I blinked, confused at first, then saw the name flashing on the screen. Sheriff Morrison. With every ounce of strength I had left, I slid from the chair and crawled toward it. My hand trembled as I answered. "Mrs. Patterson," his voice came through, urgent and crackling. "I got your letter this morning. Are you all right? Are you okay?" I forced the words out through shallow breaths. "Zuri, she just left. Something in my coffee." There was a pause, then his voice sharpened. "Stay on the line. I'm sending help right now." Everything after that came in, flashes, the sirens, the blur of uniforms, the sensation of being lifted, the cold air on my face as someone said, "She's still conscious." Zuri had made a critical mistake. She'd assumed that the same dose that ended Michael's life would finish me too, but she'd misjudged. My smaller frame, my old habit of drinking extra strong coffee ironically, had given me a resistance she hadn't counted on. The emergency doctors worked for hours. They stabilized me, removed the toxins from my system, and by evening I was told I would recover completely. When I woke the next morning, sunlight streamed through the hospital blinds. Sheriff Morrison was sitting beside my bed, his expression grim but steady. "How are you feeling?" he asked quietly. "Like I've been run over by a freight train," I rasped. "But alive." He nodded. "Good. Now, Eileen, I need you to tell me everything. What happened at that cabin, what Zuri said, what she admitted." I told him everything, every word, every threat, every twisted confession she'd made before walking out that door. From the moment I found Michael's letter in that old toolbox to the night Zuri revealed her true face, I told Sheriff Morrison everything. He listened intently, jotting careful notes, occasionally asking me to clarify a detail. When I finally finished, he leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "The problem we have," he said slowly, "is that a lot of what she told you, about falsifying records, manipulating the will, even editing the footage, might actually be true. If she's been planning this as long as she claims, she could have covered her tracks well." My heart sank. "So, she's going to get away with it? After everything she did to Michael?" Morrison shook his head. "Not necessarily. People like Zuri always make the same mistake. They think they're too clever to ever be caught. She tried to rewrite the story to make your son look unstable, but to pull that off, she had to leave breadcrumbs, traces that connect her back to what really happened." He opened a thick folder from the table beside my bed. "After I got your letter yesterday, I made a few calls. Turns out you weren't the only one asking questions about Zuri." I frowned. "What do you mean?" "The FBI's been tracking her for months," he said. "She's part of a much bigger investigation, a network of people who target wealthy partners, marry them, and then, conveniently, become widows." I stared at him. stunned. "She's done this before," he continued grimly. "3 times that we know of. Each time the husband passed under suspicious but natural circumstances. Each time she inherited everything. And each time there wasn't quite enough proof to bring her down." He flipped through several documents, shaking his head. "But this time, she got sloppy. Maybe because she was juggling you and Michael at once. Or maybe she just thought she was untouchable. Either way, she made mistakes." "What kind of mistakes?" I asked quietly. "For starters, she tried to harm you the same way she did Michael. But what she didn't know was that the FBI had already been monitoring her communications. They intercepted her messages with her so-called developers, including talk about the old woman problem." I felt my stomach twist. "They recorded her?" "Every word," Morrison said. "Phone calls, meetings, text messages, even the conversations she had with that notary who helped forge the documents." My eyes widened. "You mean the woman who came to the cabin?" Morrison gave a small, knowing smile. "That wasn't a real notary. That was Agent Sarah Martinez, undercover with the FBI." The realization hit me like lightning. The government had known. They'd been watching everything. "They've been building a case against her entire operation for over a year," Morrison said. "When they realized she was planning to target you next, they decided it was time to move. But they needed her to commit a direct crime, something they could witness firsthand. That's why agents were stationed all around your cabin that morning, ready to step in if things went too far." I swallowed hard. "So, they used me as bait." Morrison's face softened. "They knew the risk, Eileen. But what you did, surviving, recording her confession, you gave them everything they needed. You finished what Michael started." He nodded toward my phone resting on the bedside table. "That video, along with the call logs and the toxicology results, sealed the case. Zuri's in federal custody now. She was arrested this morning at the spa while she was building her alibi. The FBI had agents there waiting." For a long moment, I couldn't speak. All I could do was breathe, deeply, shakily, as the weight of it began to settle. Over the next few days, as I recovered in the hospital, the full story came to light. The FBI's investigation revealed a web of deceit spanning nearly a decade. Zuri wasn't just a manipulative spouse. She was what investigators called a black widow, a career predator who used marriage as her weapon. Her victims were always the same: wealthy, generous men who trusted her completely. She would isolate them from family, alter their medical treatments, fabricate evidence of mental decline, and then collect their estates after their untimely deaths. Michael had been her 4th husband. Before him, there was Robert Chen, a software executive in California. Before that, James Mitchell, a real estate developer in Florida. And before him, David Torres, a respected surgeon in Arizona. Each man had died of what was deemed a natural cause. Each one had left everything to Zuri, but Michael had been different. Even though she'd tampered with the evidence, his curiosity, his determination to protect me, had uncovered just enough threads for investigators to follow, and those threads had led straight to her. When Agent Martinez visited me a few days later, now wearing her actual badge instead of her notary disguise, she gave me a small, kind smile. "Your son saved lives, Mrs. Patterson," she said softly. "If we hadn't stopped her here, she would have moved on to her next target within months." I nodded, tears blurring my eyes. He always wanted to help people. I just never imagined it would be like this. Martinez placed a reassuring hand on my arm. "He made sure the truth would come out, and thanks to you, it did." "How did you know she was planning to kill me?" I asked. Agent Martinez exchanged a glance with Sheriff Morrison. "We've been monitoring her communications since before Michael's death," she said. "When she started talking about the mineral rights problem and how she planned to handle you, we knew we had to act." She pulled out a tablet and showed me security footage from around the cabin, dark shapes moving through the trees. We had agents positioned nearby, ready to move in if things went too far. The plan was to let her talk. People like Zuri can't resist bragging once they think they've won. I let out a shaky laugh. She nearly succeeded. Martinez smiled faintly. You almost died because you're tougher than any of us expected. Most people wouldn't have survived half of what you did. Your son would have been proud of how hard you fought back. The legal process moved faster than anyone expected. With the recording of Zuri's confession, the toxicology results, and months of FBI surveillance, the evidence against her was overwhelming. Facing the certainty of a conviction, she agreed to a plea deal: life in prison, no possibility of parole. Her accomplices, the fake developers, the forgers, and others tied to her network, received sentences ranging from 10 to 25 years. The courts declared the forged will invalid. Michael's real will, the one he'd written to protect me, was finally honored. The house on Oakwood Drive, along with all of his legitimate assets, was returned to me. And most importantly, the mineral rights to Willow Creek were officially mine. When Blackstone Energy completed their updated survey, the final offer came in at $72 million, even more than Zuri had known about. I sold the mineral rights, but I kept the cabin, because after everything that had happened, that little wooden house wasn't a place of exile anymore. It was where I'd found the courage to fight back, where my son's voice had guided me through the darkness. 6 months later, I sat on the newly renovated porch at Willow Creek, watching the sunrise paint the forest in shades of gold and amber. The cabin looked nothing like it had when I'd first arrived in despair. New windows, a solid roof, fresh paint, warm light spilling through the glass. It was finally the peaceful retreat Michael had always wanted it to be. I still kept the Oakwood Drive house, but I spent more and more time here. There was something healing about this place, the whisper of the trees, the soft rush of the nearby stream, the quiet reminder that peace can grow even after tragedy. My phone buzzed on the table beside me. A message from Agent Martinez. Thought you'd want to know. The Bureau recovered over $50 million Zuri had stolen from her previous victims. It's being returned to their families. I smiled through tears. Zuri's own greed had destroyed her. If she'd been satisfied with what she already had, she might have escaped justice. But her hunger for more, for the mineral rights, for total control, had led her straight into her own downfall. Another message appeared, this one from Sheriff Morrison. Grand jury just returned indictments in 3 more cases. Zuri's being charged in California, Florida, and Arizona. Justice for them, too. I set the phone down and picked up the framed photo beside my chair. Michael at age 10, beaming proudly as he held up that fish he'd caught right here at Willow Creek. His grin was wide and fearless, the way I remembered him. We got her, sweetheart, I whispered. She'll never hurt anyone else. A soft breeze rustled the leaves overhead, and for a moment I could almost hear Michael's laughter in the wind. Not words, but a feeling. Peace, love, completion. I had justice, I had freedom, and I had the memory of a boy who'd loved me enough to reach beyond time and save his mother. In the end, that was worth more than all the oil buried beneath this ground. Before you go, I'd love to hear from you. What would you have done if you were in my place? Have you ever faced something that tested your strength or faith the same way? Share your thoughts in the comments. I always read them. And if you've made it this far, thank you for being here with me. On the final screen, I've left you 2 more stories that will truly surprise you. This is Eileen's story, and I'm grateful you listened to the end. See you in the next one.